Lo Yuan had 3 tattoos that told you everything you needed to know about staying alive in his world. The serpent on his right hand meant he'd killed his first mentor. The chrysanthemum over his heart meant he'd buried his last weakness 6 feet under frozen ground. And the unfinished dragon coiling up his throat meant he wasn't done collecting debts. But when a storm hit the city so hard even his armored convoy couldn't move, and a woman with nothing but a soaked duffel bag looked at his security cameras and didn't blink, he realized something terrifying. Surviving 3 assassination attempts was easier than surviving one night with someone who refused to fear him. The woman who stood dripping on his marble floor that night, wearing clothes that had seen better decades, speaking with the kind of tired dignity that only comes from losing everything, and asking him if his throne ever felt like a prison. She didn't just break his rules. She walked into his fortress like she'd been invited, sat at his table like she belonged there, and looked at the monster of the East like he was just another man who'd forgotten how to be human. Welcome to the darkest love story you'll hear this year. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever let a stranger in and regretted it, or realized it saved your life? The thing about controlling half the triad operations in 3 countries was that people rarely looked Lo Yuan in the eye. Politicians mumbled. Rivals calculated. Even his own lieutenants measured their words like they were defusing bombs. But Cindy Mendez, drenched and defiant, had walked into his study, glanced at the wall of surveillance screens showing his empire in real time and said, "You have all this, and you still can't smile. That's the saddest thing I've seen all week." And Locke, who'd once watched a man beg for 20 minutes without flinching, felt something crack inside his chest. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm responding to everyone. Click subscribe, like this video. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want me to miss them. Let's begin. The rain didn't fall so much as it attacked. Lo Yuan watched it hammer against the bulletproof windows of his study, each drop exploding like tiny grenades against the glass. The weather report had called it a, quote, once-in-a-century storm. His head of security had called it an operational nightmare. Locke called it convenient. Nobody would be moving product tonight, which meant nobody would be stealing it either. He was on his 3rd bourbon when the motion sensors pinged. The sound was subtle, a soft chime that most people would miss. Locke had survived 28 years in the triad because he didn't miss anything. His eyes flicked to the bank of monitors embedded in the mahogany paneling. 12 screens showing 12 different angles of his estate, all of them streaming nothing but rain and darkness. Except for camera 7, there was a woman at his gate. Locke leaned forward, the leather of his chair creaking. The figure was barely visible through the downpour, just a dark shape, pressed against the iron bars like a piece of driftwood caught in a flood. She wasn't trying to climb over, wasn't shouting into the intercom. She was just standing there, waiting, like she had nowhere else to go and had made peace with drowning. He should have ignored her. In his world, people at your gate after midnight were either threats or idiots, and both deserved whatever the storm gave them. But something about the way she stood, shoulders squared despite the wind trying to bend her in half, head still up even as the rain tried to drive her into the ground, made him pause. Locke pressed the intercom. "You're trespassing." The woman's head turned toward the camera. Even through the rain and the grainy night vision feed, he could see her face. Young, maybe late 20s. Black. Exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. "I know," she said. Her voice came through the speaker clear and steady. "I also know you're not going to shoot me. Your type doesn't waste bullets on people who can't fight back." Locke's finger hovered over the disconnect button. Your type. She'd sized him up in 3 seconds flat, reduced him to a category, a predictable variable. He should have been insulted. Instead, he was curious. "What do you want?" "Shelter. Just until the storm passes." She shifted, and he saw the duffel bag clutched against her chest. Everything she owned, probably. "I'm not asking for charity. I can work. I can clean, cook, whatever you need. I have staff for that. Then I'll stay out of your way." The wind gusted hard enough to make her stumble, but she caught herself. "Please. The shelters are full. The buses stopped running an hour ago. I just need somewhere dry." Locke should have said no. His estate wasn't a halfway house. He didn't do kindness, didn't do mercy, didn't do random acts of anything that couldn't be leveraged later. The dragon on his throat had been earned by knowing exactly when to be ruthless. But he was already reaching for his phone. "Zhang," he said when his driver answered. "There's someone at the gate. Bring her to the south entrance. And find her some dry clothes." There was a pause. Zhang had been with him for 8 years, and knew better than to question orders, but Locke could hear the confusion anyway. "Sir, the roads. I'm aware of the roads. That's why she's staying here tonight. One night. Then she's gone." He disconnected before Zhang could respond. On the monitor, the woman's shoulders sagged with relief so profound it looked like her bones might give out. She pressed her forehead against the wet iron of the gate, and for a moment, Locke thought she might be crying. But when she looked up at the camera again, her eyes were dry. "Thank you," she said. Locke didn't respond. He was already regretting it, already calculating the variables. One civilian in his home meant one potential witness, one liability, one loose thread that could unravel if pulled. He'd give her a blanket, maybe some food, and Zhang would drive her to a shelter in the morning when the roads cleared. Simple, transactional. The way he liked everything in his life. He watched her disappear from camera 7 as the gate rolled open, then reappear on camera 3 as Zhang's headlights found her in the rain. She climbed into the car slowly, like her body was remembering how to hope. Locke finished his bourbon in one swallow and turned away from the monitors. One night. What could possibly go wrong in one night? Zhang didn't speak during the 30-second drive from the gate to the mansion's south entrance, which told Cindy everything she needed to know about the kind of man who lived here. People who inspired that level of nervous silence were either monsters or gods, and in her experience, the two weren't mutually exclusive. The car stopped beneath a covered portico lit by recessed lights that probably cost more than her last year's rent. Zhang got out, opened an umbrella she didn't need anymore, and gestured toward a steel door that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. "Miss," he said. It wasn't friendly. It was the verbal equivalent of a hand on her back, pushing her forward. Cindy stepped into the kind of cold that had nothing to do with temperature. The hallway was all white marble and track lighting, sterile as an operating room. Her wet shoes squeaked against the floor, each step echoing like an accusation. There were cameras in the corners, small, expensive ones that didn't bother pretending to be anything else. The walls were bare except for a single piece of art that looked like someone had thrown black ink at white canvas and called it philosophy. Zhang led her deeper into the house, through corridors that twisted like a maze designed to disorient intruders. They passed a room where she glimpsed a wall of monitors, each one showing a different angle of the estate. Another room had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, but the books looked unread, their spines too perfect. Everything here was for show or for function. Nothing was for comfort. They stopped at a sitting room that managed to be both enormous and suffocating. The furniture was black leather and chrome, arranged with the kind of precision that suggested someone had used a ruler. A glass coffee table held a neat stack of magazines in languages Cindy couldn't read and didn't care to. And sitting in the corner, in a chair that looked more like a throne, was the man from the intercom. Cindy had spent 3 years as a social worker in neighborhoods where death wore different faces every week. She'd sat across from gang members, addicts, abusers, and every flavor of human wreckage the system created. She knew how to read violence in the set of someone's shoulders, how to spot the exact moment kindness turned to threat. This man was violence, distilled to its purest form. He was younger than his voice suggested, maybe mid-30s, with features that would have been handsome if they weren't carved from something harder than flesh. His black hair was styled with the kind of precision that took either vanity or control. She suspected the latter. He wore a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms covered in ink so dense it looked like armor. But it was his throat that caught her attention. A dragon, unfinished, its scales climbing from his collar toward his jaw like it was trying to devour his face. He didn't stand when she entered. Didn't even look at her at first. He was smoking a cigarette, watching the rain through the window like it owed him money. "Sit," he said. Cindy sat. Her duffel bag made a wet sound against the leather. Only then did he turn to look at her, and she understood why Zhang had been so quiet. This man's eyes didn't see people. They saw calculations, variables, threats to be assessed and neutralized. She'd seen that look before, in the eyes of the administrators who'd fired her for inappropriate advocacy, in the landlord who'd smiled while serving her eviction notice, in every person who'd decided her humanity was negotiable. She looked right back at him. His gaze flicked to her bag, then to her ruined clothes, then to her face. "You're not afraid." It wasn't a question, but Cindy answered anyway. "I've been afraid. This isn't it." Something flickered across his face, too quick to name. He took a drag of his cigarette, and she noticed the gun on the table beside him. Not hidden, not displayed. Just there, like a stapler or a remote control. "Zhang will show you to a guest room," he said. "There's a bathroom. Clothes that might fit. You stay there until morning. And then you leave." Cindy nodded slowly, her eyes moving around the room. She saw the second gun now, in a holster hung over the back of another chair. Saw the small mirror angled to show the doorway behind him. Saw the way every piece of furniture was positioned to never leave his back exposed. "You live in a fortress," she said. "I live in reality." "No." She met his eyes again. "You live in a cage. You just happen to build it yourself." The silence that followed was the kind that precedes either violence or revelation. Zhang's hand moved toward his jacket, toward whatever he kept there for situations like this. But the man in the chair just smiled. It was a terrible smile, empty as a gun's barrel. "Zhang," he said softly. "Show our guest to the blue room." Cindy stood, shouldering her duffel. As she passed him, she caught the scent of expensive tobacco and something darker underneath. Something like blood, old and permanent. "Thank you," she said. "Don't," he replied. "Gratitude is premature." Locke didn't sleep. Sleep was a luxury afforded to people who didn't have a dozen enemies plotting their demise at any given moment. Instead, he worked, reviewing shipment manifests, studying security footage, returning encrypted messages from lieutenants who needed to know he was always watching. At 2 in the morning, the kitchen motion sensor pinged. His hand went to the gun on his desk before his mind fully processed the alert. The monitor showed the blue room's door opening, a figure moving down the hallway with the hesitant steps of someone trying not to wake a house that never slept. Locke watched her navigate toward the kitchen like she was memorizing the route. Smart. Always know your exits. He'd taught that to every soldier who'd survived long enough to become useful. He should have stayed in his study. Should have let her wander, maybe call Zhang to escort her back. But curiosity, that dangerous, useless thing he'd spent years strangling, made him move. By the time he reached the kitchen, she'd already found the lights. The space was a monument to excess he never used. Italian marble counters, commercial-grade appliances, a refrigerator that could store enough food for a small army. His personal chef came twice a week to stock it with meals Locke barely touched. He ate because biology demanded it, nothing more. Cindy stood at the refrigerator with the door open, silhouetted by its light, wearing the clothes Zhang had found for her. Gray sweatpants that pulled at her ankles, an oversized black t-shirt that hung off one shoulder. Her hair was still damp, pulled back from her face. She turned when she heard him, startled but not frightened. "I'm sorry. I couldn't sleep. I thought," she gestured at the refrigerator's contents, "I thought maybe I could make something. To earn my keep." "You don't need to earn anything. You're leaving in 6 hours." "I know. But I'm awake, and you probably haven't eaten. And she paused, searching for words. "I'm better when my hands are busy." Locke should have sent her back to her room. Should have reminded her that this wasn't a bed and breakfast, that he didn't need or want her domesticity contaminating his space. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe and lit a cigarette. "The kitchen is equipped with everything. Use whatever you want." He told himself he was staying to observe her, to ensure she wasn't snooping or planning something. That's what he told himself. Cindy moved through his kitchen like she was conducting an archaeological dig, opening drawers and cabinets with increasing wonder. "You have 3 different sizes of whisks," she said. "Do you even cook?" "No." "Then why?" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "Never mind. I'm going to make something simple. Rice. Eggs. Whatever vegetables are still good in here." She worked with the efficiency of someone who'd stretched limited ingredients across too many meals. No wasted motion, no unnecessary flourishes. She found rice in a container that had probably cost $100, rinsed it in a pot that could have fed 20 people. While it cooked, she diced vegetables with one of his chef's knives, the blade moving faster than seemed safe. Locke watched from the shadows of the doorway, smoke curling toward the ceiling. There was something hypnotic about it. The rhythm of the knife, the sizzle when vegetables hit the heated pan, the way she tasted things with a spoon and adjusted without measuring. "You were a cook," he said. "I was a lot of things. Cooking was just what I did to survive between the things that mattered." She cracked eggs into the pan with one hand, a trick that spoke of repetition. "My grandmother taught me." She said food was the language everybody speaks, even when they're pretending not to understand you. Your grandmother was an optimist. She was a realist who chose hope anyway. Cindy glanced over her shoulder at him. "There's a difference." The rice cooker beeped. She moved, like she'd lived in this kitchen for years, finding plates in the cabinet, serving spoons in the drawer. She plated 2 portions with the kind of care that felt almost violent in its gentleness. The rice pressed into a neat mound, the vegetables and eggs arranged like they mattered. She set both plates on the kitchen island, sat on one of the stools, looked at him expectantly. Locke didn't move. "I'm not hungry." "Yes, you are. You've been running on bourbon and cigarettes since I got here. Probably longer." She picked up her fork. "I'm not asking you to like me. I'm not even asking you to talk. But I made enough for 2, and it's worse to eat alone." This was the moment to establish boundaries. To remind her that he didn't share meals with strays, didn't break bread with people who'd be gone by sunrise. But he found himself moving toward the island, found himself sitting across from her, the plate between them like a negotiation neither had agreed to. The food was simple, perfect, the kind of meal that tasted like someone gave a damn. Locke ate in silence, watching her over the rim of his fork. She didn't fill the quiet with nervous chatter, didn't ask invasive questions. She just ate, occasionally glancing at the rain still hammering the windows. "This is good," he said finally. Cindy smiled. It was small, tired, but real. "I know." And Locke realized with sudden, terrible clarity that this moment of shared food and quiet company was more dangerous than any bullet he'd ever dodged. They ended up in Locke's study because the kitchen felt too exposed, too bright, or maybe because 3 in the morning demanded darker spaces for the kind of truths that couldn't survive daylight. Cindy carried her tea. She'd made it without asking, found his imported leaves like a detective finding evidence, and settled into the leather chair across from his desk without invitation. The audacity should have annoyed him. Instead, it felt like watching someone claim territory they'd already won. Locke poured himself another bourbon, his 4th, or 5th. He'd stopped counting around the time she'd plated that meal. "You're staring," she said. "I'm observing." Same thing, different ego. She sipped her tea, eyes moving across the monitors behind him. 12 screens showing his empire in real time. Empty corridors, locked gates, rain turning his world into a watercolor of gray and black. You watch everything, but do you ever actually see anything? Philosophy at 3 a.m. How original. It's not philosophy, it's pattern recognition. She set her cup down with the kind of care that made even that gesture feel deliberate. "I've met men like you before. Different uniforms, same survival instinct. You build walls so high you forget what you were protecting in the first place." Locke leaned back in his chair, the dragon on his throat catching the light. "You don't know anything about me. I know you let a stranger into your home during a storm. I know you have a kitchen full of equipment you never use and books you never read. I know you sit in the dark watching cameras, because if you stop watching, someone might get close enough to matter." She met his eyes. "I know because I used to be the same way. Just with fewer guns and worse real estate." Something in her voice made him pause. Not the words themselves, but the weight behind them. The kind of weight that came from carrying things until your spine learned to bend. "What did you do?" he asked. "Before you ended up at my gate?" "I was a social worker. Citywide child services." She said it without pride or shame, just fact. "I thought I could fix broken systems from the inside. Thought if I worked hard enough, cared enough, I could make a difference for kids who had nobody else. And I helped the wrong family." Her fingers tightened around her cup. 15-year-old girl named Maya. Her father was a deputy commissioner. Powerful man, connected man. The kind of man whose reputation mattered more than his daughter's safety. She paused, something dark moving behind her eyes. "Maya told me things. Showed me bruises in places nobody would see. I documented everything. Filed the reports. Followed protocol." Locke knew where this was going. He'd seen enough of the world's machinery to know how it crushed people who challenged it. "Protocol didn't matter," Cindy continued. "The commissioner made some calls. Suddenly my documentation was, quote, questionable. My judgment was impaired. They suggested I was emotionally unstable, projecting my own trauma onto vulnerable clients." She laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. "They gave me a choice. Resign quietly, or face a formal investigation that would destroy what was left of my career. You resigned." "I fought. For 6 months I fought. Used every appeal, every review board, every procedure in the handbook." She set her cup down harder this time. "They buried me. Blacklisted me from every agency in the state. My landlord, who happened to play golf with the commissioner, suddenly discovered code violations. My car got towed 3 times in 2 weeks. My bank froze my accounts for suspicious activity that never existed." "Systematic destruction," Locke said quietly. "Efficient. They didn't just fire me. They erased me." Cindy's voice stayed level, but her hands trembled. "Made sure I couldn't help anyone else. Made sure my name became a cautionary tale about what happens when you challenge people with power." Locke understood that instinct. He'd done similar things to people who'd threatened his operation. Dismantled their lives piece by piece until they were too broken to be dangerous. The methodology was familiar. The righteousness behind it was just window dressing. "Maya," he asked. "Still with her father, as far as I know. I'm not allowed near her. Restraining order." Cindy looked at him, really looked at him, and Locke saw himself reflected in her eyes. "So yes, I understand your world better than you think. I know what it's like when the rules only protect certain people. When justice is just another word for whoever has the most leverage." The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. "The difference," Locke said finally, "is that I chose this. I looked at the system and decided to burn it down from the outside. And I tried to fix it from the inside. Different methods, same realization." She picked up her tea again. "We're both ghosts, Locke. You just haunt a better neighborhood." He should have argued, should have drawn the line between her naive heroism and his pragmatic brutality. But the truth was uglier and simpler. They were both people the world had tried to silence. She'd been punished for caring. He'd been rewarded for not. "You're right," he said. Cindy blinked. About what? My throne does look like a cage. The lights died at 3:47 a.m. One moment, Locke's study was illuminated by the cold glow of monitors and recessed lighting. The next, darkness swallowed everything except the emergency backup lights that clicked on with the precision of a held breath. Locke was on his feet before the monitors finished their reboot sequence, his hand already wrapped around the gun he kept mounted under his desk. Years of survival had taught him to distinguish between accidents and attacks. This wasn't an accident. Stay in that chair, he told Cindy. His voice had changed, stripped of the philosophical weariness from moments before, reduced to command and calculation. Don't move. Don't speak. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. Smart woman. The monitors flickered back to life, powered by the backup generators that could run his security system for 72 hours. But something was wrong. Camera 3 showed static. Camera 7 was dark. Camera 9 had rotated 15 degrees off its standard position. Someone was inside his perimeter. Locke's phone buzzed with the encrypted alert he'd been dreading since he'd built this empire. 3 short pulses, pause, 2 more pulses. The code that meant his security system had detected an internal breach, not someone trying to get in, but someone already inside who knew enough to disable specific systems in sequence. A professional hit, coordinated, timed to coincide with the storm when response times would be measured in hours instead of minutes. We need to move, he said, already pulling open a drawer that revealed not files but ammunition. He loaded a second gun with movements, so practiced they looked like muscle memory's prayer. Now, Cindy stood slowly, her eyes tracking his movements. What's happening? Someone's in my house who shouldn't be. He moved to the wall, pressed a panel that looked like decoration. It slid open, revealing a narrow corridor lit by red emergency lighting. Someone I probably trusted yesterday. Your own people? The only people who can kill you are the ones close enough to know where you sleep. He gestured toward the hidden passage. Move. We have maybe 3 minutes before they realized the breach alarm went silent. She didn't argue, didn't freeze. Just grabbed her duffel bag. Always know what you're carrying, always be ready to run, and stepped into the passage. Locke followed, the panel sliding shut behind them with a whisper of expensive engineering. The corridor was barely wide enough for one person, designed for escape rather than comfort. Locke had built it himself 5 years ago, told nobody about it except the contractor he'd paid, and then quietly relocated to Singapore. Trust was currency he couldn't afford to spend. They moved through the darkness, Cindy's breathing steady ahead of him. Behind them, muffled by walls and distance, came the sound of his study door being kicked open. Heavy boots, multiple footsteps, professional rhythm. How many? Cindy whispered. At least 4, probably 6. Locke's mind was already running calculations. They'll search the obvious places first. We have 10 minutes, maybe 15 if they're cautious. And then they start looking for the passages. He placed a hand on her shoulder, stopping her at an intersection. Left led to the garage. Right led to the wine cellar, and another exit. Straight ahead led to the panic room, steel reinforced, supplied for a 2-week siege, and currently useless, because it would trap them like rats in a barrel. Locke chose left. Always keep moving. Static targets die first. They emerged into the garage through another hidden panel, this one disguised as a circuit breaker box. The space was dark, except for the emergency lights casting everything in shades of blood and shadow. 6 vehicles, each one armored, each one fueled and ready. Locke had learned early that escape routes without transportation were just elaborate tombs. He moved toward the Mercedes, keys already in his hand, except the keys weren't where they should be. Cindy saw his expression change. What? The keys are gone. He checked the BMW, the Range Rover, the Audi. Every vehicle had been disabled, keys removed with surgical precision. They'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months. So we're trapped. No. Locke's mind shifted gears, discarding the first 3 exit strategies and jumping to contingencies he'd hoped never to use. We're just playing a different game now. Above them, through the ceiling, came the sound of footsteps. Systematic, room by room, getting closer. Locke looked at Cindy, this woman who'd stumbled into his world by accident, who should have been drinking tea in a shelter instead of running for her life in a dead man's garage, and made a decision that felt like jumping off a cliff. Can you shoot? She met his eyes. I've never had to find out. You're about to. He pressed the second gun into her hands. Safety's here. Point away from yourself. Aim for center mass. Don't hesitate. Cindy's fingers closed around the weapon. She didn't shake. Didn't cry. Just nodded once. Good, Locke said. Now stay close. We're going hunting. The mansion had become a predator's maze, every shadow a potential grave. Locke moved through it like he was reading a language only he could speak. 3 steps, pause, listen, Advance. Cindy followed so close he could feel her breath on his neck, the gun he'd given her held in a two-handed grip that suggested she'd been paying attention. They stayed low, used the furniture as cover, avoided the center of rooms where moonlight through the windows would silhouette them into targets. The storm had lessened to a steady rain, which meant sound traveled differently now. Every creak of floorboard, every drip of water, became data to process. Locke heard them before he saw them. Two men clearing the east wing with professional efficiency. He pulled Cindy behind a marble column, their bodies pressed close enough that he felt her heart hammering against his spine. She didn't make a sound, just breathed through her nose, shallow and controlled. The men passed within 10 feet, their tactical gear and suppressed weapons confirming what Locke already knew. This wasn't a rival gang making a move. This was internal. Someone on his payroll had decided his reign was negotiable. When their footsteps faded, Cindy leaned close to his ear. They're moving in a pattern, clearing rooms left to right, never splitting up. Military training. Locke glanced at her. How do you know that? First dated a Marine for 2 years. He cleared our apartment the same way every time he heard a noise. She pointed toward the corridor ahead. If they're systematic, they've already been through the library. It'll be empty. She was right. The library was cathedral quiet when they slipped inside, its floor-to-ceiling shelves creating corridors of leather and paper that Locke had never bothered to read. He moved toward the far wall where another exit waited, except Cindy grabbed his arm. Stop. He froze. What? She pointed at the floor. In the dim emergency lighting, he could barely see it. A thin wire stretched across the doorway, positioned exactly at ankle height. Tripwire. Basic, effective, and something his security team would have known to place if they'd turned the mansion into a kill box. Christ, Locke breathed. His own people knew his escape routes, knew his patterns, knew exactly where to lay traps that would funnel him into ambush points. Can you disarm it? Cindy asked. Not without tools, not without light. He scanned the room, his tactical mind reassessing every assumption. They've had weeks to prepare this. Every exit I know about is probably compromised. Then we use the exits you don't know about. There are always exits nobody plans for. Cindy moved past him, studying the walls with the kind of attention Locke usually reserved for security footage. This is an old house under new construction. You probably gutted it, kept the bones, added your fortress on top. But old houses have old secrets. She ran her hands along the shelving, pressing panels, testing for hollow sounds. Locke wanted to tell her she was wasting time, that architectural mysteries were irrelevant when men with guns were hunting them. But then he heard the click. A section of shelving swung inward, revealing a narrow servant's passage that smelled like dust and decades. The kind of space rich people built so their help could move through the house without being seen. It hadn't shown up on any of the renovation blueprints Locke had reviewed. Hadn't appeared on any security assessment. How did you? Social worker, remember? I've been in every kind of building this city has. The fancy ones always have hidden spaces where the real work happened. She stepped into the passage. Rich people hate seeing how their comfort gets made. Locke followed her into the darkness, pulling the shelf closed behind them. The passage was claustrophobic, designed for people who didn't have the luxury of taking up space. They moved through it sideways, the walls close enough to touch both shoulders. Behind them, muffled by old wood and newer drywall, came the sound of the library door being kicked open. Voices, frustrated cursing. They'd found the tripwire intact, which meant their prey had escaped. Cindy led them through turns Locke didn't remember building, downstairs that descended into what must have been the original basement. The air got colder, damper. He could hear pipes, the hum of HVAC systems, the mechanical heartbeat of his fortress that he'd never bothered to understand. Where does this go? He whispered. Out. Eventually, all servant passages lead somewhere useful. Kitchen, probably, or... She stopped so suddenly he nearly crashed into her. Or the wine cellar. She was right. The passage ended at a small door, barely 4 feet high, that opened into his temperature-controlled wine cellar. 30,000 bottles he'd bought because powerful men were supposed to have collections. He'd never tasted a single one. They emerged into the cool darkness, and Locke finally allowed himself to breathe. You saved our lives, he said. Cindy checked her gun, making sure the safety was still on. Don't thank me yet. We're still trapped in your cage. The wine cellar had 3 exits, which made it both strategic and stupid depending on how many directions death could come from. Locke was calculating odds when he heard the voice that turned his blood to ice. I knew you'd end up here eventually. Chen Wei stepped out from behind a rack of vintage Bordeaux, his gun already raised, already aimed. Locke's second-in-command for 7 years. The man who'd stood beside him through 3 territory wars and a dozen betrayals. The man Locke had trusted more than anyone in his poisoned world. Chen. Locke's own weapon came up by instinct, creating a standoff measured in heartbeats and bullets. I should have known. Yes, you should have. Chen's face was calm, almost serene. The expression of a man who'd already made peace with his decisions. But you were too busy being the monster of the East to notice the people actually keeping your empire running. Beside Locke, Cindy had gone still, her gun pointed at the floor but her finger near the trigger. Smart enough to know this wasn't her fight. Smart enough to be ready anyway. How long? Locke asked. 2 years. Since you promoted me, and then proceeded to treat me like expensive furniture. Chen's jaw tightened. Do you even remember my daughter's name, Locke? I showed you pictures. Told you about her school performance. You looked at me like I was speaking a language you'd forgotten. Locke didn't remember. Couldn't remember. His mind filed away tactical information, threat assessments, power structures. Personal details were noise that cluttered operational clarity. I pay you well, Locke said. You pay everyone well. Money is your substitute for actual humanity. Chen took a step closer, his gun never wavering. You know what you said when I asked for time off to attend her recital? You said family is a liability we can't afford. Like she was a security risk instead of a 10-year-old girl who wanted her father to watch her dance. The words hung in the cold air between them. Locke searched his memory, found the conversation filed under personnel request, denied, with no emotional context attached. He'd meant it practically. Operationally, time away meant vulnerability. He'd been protecting them both. So you decided to kill me, Locke said flatly. I decided to take what you've spent years convincing yourself you don't need. Power without the pretense of being untouchable. Chen's eyes flicked to Cindy. Who's she? New asset? Another person you'll use until they're not convenient anymore? She's nobody, Locke said quickly. Wrong place, wrong time. Let her walk. There is no walking away tonight. She's seen too much. She's... Chen paused, something shifting in his expression as he really looked at Cindy for the first time. Wait. You gave her a gun. Locke Yuan gave a civilian a loaded weapon. He laughed, sharp and bitter. You've known her what, 6 hours? And you're already protecting her like she matters. That's rich. Chen. Shut up. The gun swung back to Locke with renewed conviction. 7 years. 7 years I stood beside you, bled for you, buried bodies for you. And in one night, some random woman gets more humanity from you than I ever did. That's how I know you're not the monster you pretend to be, Locke. You're just a coward who's terrified of being seen. The accusation hit harder than any bullet could. Because Chen was right. Locke had built his coldness like armor, convinced himself that emotional distance was tactical superiority. He'd cataloged Chen's usefulness, his reliability, his skill set, but had never bothered to learn the name of the daughter who made him smile. I'm sorry, Locke said. The words felt foreign in his mouth, unpracticed. Too late for sorry. Too late for everything except. Cindy's voice cut through the standoff like a blade. Your daughter's name is May. She's 10 years old. She takes ballet on Tuesdays and soccer on Thursdays. Her favorite color is purple, but she tells her friends it's red because she thinks it makes her sound tougher. Chen's gun lowered half an inch. How do you? Because I listened. Back in the corridor, when you were talking to the other man. You showed him a photo on your phone before you split up. Called her your little fighter. Said you were doing this so she could have a better life. Cindy took a careful step forward, her own gun now pointed deliberately at the floor. You love her. That's not weakness. That's the only thing about tonight that isn't. You don't understand, Chen said, but his voice had cracked. I understand that you're about to murder a man who failed you, and then murder me to cover it up, and your daughter will grow up knowing her father died in a gang war but never knowing why. Cindy's eyes were steady, carrying the weight of every child she tried to save. I understand that you can't give her a better life with blood money, Chen. It doesn't work that way. The silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Chen's gun wavered, lowered. His face crumpled with something that looked like grief, finally allowed to surface. I can't stop it, he whispered. The others, they won't let either of you walk out. This was my plan, but it's their operation now. Locke understood then. Chen hadn't just betrayed him. Chen had sold his soul and found the price non-refundable. How many? Locke asked quietly. 6 more. Spread throughout the house. Chen met his eyes. I'm sorry. Then he raised his gun again. But this time, he pointed it at the ceiling and fired 3 times. The signal. The call to converge. Run, Chen said. Please. Just run. The 3 gunshots echoed through the mansion like a dinner bell for wolves. Locke grabbed Cindy's arm and pulled her toward the cellar's north exit, but footsteps were already thundering down the main stairs. 2 directions, maybe 3. They'd converged faster than he'd calculated, Chen stayed behind, his gun hanging loose at his side, a man waiting for judgment he'd already delivered to himself. Locke didn't look back. Couldn't afford to. Mercy was a currency he'd spent his entire life refusing to trade in, and now it was bankrupting him. They burst into the corridor that led to the sub-basement, Locke's last defensive position, where he'd stored enough weapons to hold off a small army. Except the door was welded shut. Fresh welds, still warm to the touch. They'd thought of everything. Up, Locke hissed, reversing direction toward the ground floor. Bad tactical position, but their options had narrowed to bad and worse. They made it to the main hallway before the first shooter appeared. 30 feet away, tactical vest, suppressed rifle already rising. Locke fired twice, center mass, the way he'd been taught before he could drive, and the man went down in a heap of Kevlar and regret. But the gunshot had given away their position. Footsteps converged from 3 directions now, the mathematical certainty of a closing trap. Locke pulled Cindy into the formal dining room, 20-foot ceilings, a table that sat 16, and exactly 0 cover worth dying behind. The windows were bulletproof. The doors were kill zones. They were trapped in a monument to his own excess. The chandelier, Cindy said suddenly. What? She was already climbing onto the table, reaching for the massive crystal fixture that hung from the ceiling like a frozen waterfall. It's on a motor. Old houses, they lowered them for cleaning. There's always a... Her fingers found something. A switch, hidden in the decorative ceiling medallion. Yes. The chandelier began to descend with a mechanical whir that sounded deafening in the sudden silence. That's not going to. Locke started, but she was already moving, positioning herself beneath the descending fixture, her duffel bag clutched against her chest. When they come through that door, she said, her voice steady despite the insanity of what she was suggesting. I'm going to draw their fire. You're going to move left, behind the serving station. 3 seconds of distraction. Make them count. No. The word came out harder than Locke intended. Absolutely not. It's not a negotiation. Cindy met his eyes, and in them he saw something that terrified him more than any gun ever had. Acceptance of her own mortality wielded like a weapon. You can shoot. I can't. Not well enough to matter. But I can give you an opening. They'll kill you. Maybe. Probably. She smiled. And it was the saddest thing he'd ever seen. But I've already been erased once, Locke. At least this time. It'll be for someone who might actually remember my name. The footsteps were closing in. 10 seconds. Maybe less. Locke's tactical mind was screaming at him to use her offer, to take the opening, to survive at the cost of her sacrifice. It's what he'd done his entire life. Calculated the value of human assets, and spent them like ammunition. But for the first time in 15 years, Locke Yuan felt something crack open in his chest. Not the surgical removal of empathy he'd performed on himself. Not the cold calculation of acceptable losses. This was fear. Raw, visceral, and utterly paralyzing. Fear that had nothing to do with his own survival, and everything to do with hers. No, he said again, and this time his voice broke. I won't let you. The door exploded inward. 2 shooters, practiced formations, rifles, already tracking. Cindy was already moving, stepping into the open, her arms spread wide like she was embracing the bullets themselves. I'm unarmed, she shouted. Don't shoot. I'm just... Time fractured. Locke saw it all in the microsecond, before action became consequence. The shooter's fingers tightening on triggers. Cindy's body exposed in the center of the room, the tactical calculations that said she'd be dead in half a second. And Locke moved. Not toward cover. Not toward tactical advantage. He moved toward her, his body intercepting the space between Cindy and the guns, his own weapon rising, as he became the shield she was never supposed to need. He fired on instinct. 3 shots so fast, they sounded like one continuous roar. The first shooter went down with a hole where his throat used to be. The second stumbled backward, his vest taking the round but the impact breaking ribs. Then pain exploded in Locke's shoulder as a third shooter, one he hadn't seen, hadn't calculated, fired from the doorway. The bullet spun him sideways, his gun clattering across the hardwood. Cindy screamed his name. Locke hit the floor hard, his vision tunneling, blood spreading across his white shirt in a pattern that looked almost artistic. He tried to rise, tried to reach for the gun, but his arm wouldn't obey. Above him, Cindy did something that defied every survival instinct. She didn't run. Didn't hide. She picked up his fallen weapon with shaking hands, pointed it at the third shooter with the stance of someone who'd never held a gun before today, and pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her over. The shot went wide by 3 feet, but it was enough to make the shooter duck, enough to break his aim, enough for Locke to roll behind the overturned table and grab his backup piece from his ankle holster. This time, Locke didn't miss. The silence that followed was broken only by Cindy's ragged breathing and the sound of Locke's blood dripping onto imported marble. You're insane, he gasped, pressing his good hand against the wound. Cindy dropped beside him, her hands already moving to assess the damage. Says the man who just used his body as a human shield. Her fingers were gentle despite their trembling. Why would you do that? Locke looked up at her. This woman who'd been in his life for less than 12 hours, who'd cooked him a meal and learned his second-in-command's daughter's name, who'd just tried to sacrifice herself so a monster could live. Because, he said, and the words felt like confession, I'm terrified of a world where you don't exist in it. The storm broke just before dawn, the way storms always did when they'd taken everything they came for. Locke sat on the marble steps of his front entrance, watching the sky bleed from black to gray to the kind of pale gold that felt like an accusation. His shoulder was wrapped in strips torn from expensive bedsheets, the bullet extracted with a pair of tweezers from his first aid kit, and Cindy's surprisingly steady hands. 3 bodies in the dining room. 2 in the hallway. Chen in the wine cellar. A single bullet in his temple, self-inflicted, according to the angle. The house smelled like cordite and failure. Cindy sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. She'd washed the blood from her hands but missed a spot near her wrist. Locke found himself staring at it, proof that she'd been elbow-deep in his wounds, keeping him alive while sirens wailed in the distance, and his empire crumbled into mathematics he no longer cared to calculate. Police will be here soon, she said quietly. Your people too, probably. The ones who weren't part of this. Let them come. Locke's voice was hoarse from smoke and screaming. I'm done running my own maze. She turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face for something he wasn't sure he'd ever possessed. What are you going to tell them? The truth. There was a coup. I survived. Chen didn't. He flexed his wounded shoulder, feeling the pull of improvised stitches. After that, I don't know. I've spent 15 years building something that tried to kill me the moment I showed a shred of humanity. That seems like data worth analyzing. You could rebuild. Tighter security. Better vetting. More. More of what made this happen in the first place. Locke shook his head. I turned myself into a machine because I thought machines couldn't be hurt. But Chen was right. I wasn't protecting myself. I was just too afraid to be seen. The sun cleared the tree line, painting his scarred estate in shades of gold that made the bullet holes look almost beautiful. Somewhere in the distance, a bird started singing, oblivious or optimistic. Locke couldn't tell which. I learned something tonight, he said. When you were standing in front of those guns, when you were trying to trade your life for mine, I felt something I haven't felt since I was a kid, watching my father bleed out on our kitchen floor. Fear? Cindy said softly. Terror. Complete, irrational terror. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past the exhaustion and blood to the woman who'd somehow walked into his fortress and dismantled him, with nothing but rice and conversation. Not for myself. For you. And I realized that every wall I'd built, every emotion I'd surgically removed, every piece of humanity I'd traded for power, it was all worthless if it meant living in a world where people like you end up dead on my dining room floor. Cindy's hand found his, her fingers threading through his like they'd done this 1,000 times before. So what now? You can't just stop being Lok Yuan, the monster of the East. No. But maybe I can become something else. He squeezed her hand, the gesture still foreign, but becoming less so. I have resources. Money, connections, infrastructure built to move things the law says shouldn't move. What if I used it differently? Differently how? There are people like you, like that girl, Maya. People crushed by systems designed to protect the powerful. What if I became the kind of monster who hunted the people who created those systems? He watched the sun climb higher, burning away the last shadows. I can't erase what I've done. Can't bring back the people I've hurt. But I can stop pretending that coldness is the same as strength. Cindy was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd lost too much to believe in easy redemptions. That's a pretty speech. But change takes more than good intentions and blood loss. I know. Locke turned to face her fully, ignoring the pain that screamed through his shoulder. That's why I'm asking you to stay. Not for one night. Not as a guest or an asset or a liability. Stay as the person who keeps me honest. Who remembers Chen's daughter's name when I forget? Who tells me when my throne starts looking like a cage again? You're asking me to be your conscience. I'm asking you to help me build something worth having a conscience about. He gestured at the scarred estate, the broken windows, the evidence of a night that had killed the man he used to be. I have the resources to change things. You have the moral clarity I've spent 15 years trying to destroy. Together, maybe we can actually fix some of what we've both watched burn. Sirens were getting closer now, the wail of emergency services responding to the night's violence. Soon there would be questions, investigations, the machinery of law trying to categorize a massacre into forms and reports. But right now, in this moment between darkness and dawn, There was just Locke and Cindy, and the possibility of becoming something neither of them had been yesterday. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said finally. "Good. That means you're thinking clearly." Locke smiled, and it felt less terrible than it had 24 hours ago. "I don't know if I can trust myself, but last night, when you put yourself between me and those bullets, I learned that some things are worth dying for. I'd like to spend whatever time I have left figuring out what's worth living for." Cindy looked at the sunrise, at the estate that had transformed from fortress to battlefield, to something she couldn't quite name yet. Then she looked back at him, and in her eyes he saw the same cautious hope that probably lived in his. "One condition," she said. "Name it. You learn Chen's daughter's name. Really learn it. And you make sure she's taken care of. College fund, therapy, whatever she needs. That's the price of me staying." Locke nodded. "May. Her name is May, and I'll make sure she has everything her father died trying to give her." The first police car rounded the bend in his driveway, lights painting the dawn in blue and red. Locke stood slowly, offering Cindy his good hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. "So what do we do now?" she asked. Locke looked at his empire, broken, bleeding, but somehow still standing. "Now we start over, and this time, we build something worth saving." The sun rose higher, burning away the last of the night. And for the first time in 15 years, Locke Yuan watched it without feeling like he was waiting for darkness to return. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe.